This movie begins in Italy during World War I, when a 70-year-old man named Carpenter Geppetto and his only child named Carlo was playing around their home happily. The old man loved his son very much because he had no one but him. He used wood to make various toys and shoes for him. One day the old man goes to the church with his son to repair a sculpture in the church. Unfortunately, the old man loses his only son Carlo from an aerial bombardment by the Austro-Hungarian forces when he and his only child about to leave the church after finishing the work. Losing a child was more painful for the old man. It was said that Geppetto's town was not even a target, and that these planes were headed back to base and unloaded their bombs to make their ballasts lighter. Geppetto honors the memory of his beloved son by planting the pinecone that Carlo found for him near his grave. Years have passed and the pinecone has grown into a tall pine tree. Geppetto grieves for his son for 20 years. Meanwhile, a traveling and illustrious writer of a cricket named Sebastian J. Cricket has found his home in the pine tree, ready to settle down and write his memoirs. One stormy night, Geppetto again finds himself drunk at his son's grave. He was almost maddened by the grief of his child and decides to bring his son back. He irrationally cuts off the pine tree and builds a wooden puppet in a fit of drunken rage. Geppetto passes out with the puppet unfinished because he was old and very weak. Nature spirits appear out of nowhere. Sebastian tries to stop them from possessing his so-called home when it merges to become the omnipotent Wood Sprite. She claims that on Earth, she is known to be a guardian who cares for the forgotten things and the lost ones. Feeling sorry for the heartbroken Geppetto, the Wood Sprite brings the wooden puppet to life in the hopes that it will bring him the joy he truly deserves. She promised Sebastian to grant any wish he desires in exchange for acting as Pinocchio's moral compass and guiding him to being good. The next day, Geppetto discovers his rather inanimate wooden puppet to be quite alive and moving. Pinocchio turns out to be quite a curious cat, seeing and feeling everything for the first time. Geppetto later locks Pinocchio in a cupboard while he goes to church. Pinocchio's curious antics make him want to go to church, where he disrupts the priest's sermon with his very existence. The villagers are terrified of Pinocchio, accused of being an abomination created by witchcraft or the devil's work. Geppetto explains that his nose will grow every time he tells a lie. Later that night, Geppetto is visited by the priest and the village's podesta, the city's highest-ranked civil officer and the highest judicial and military magistrate, to assess if this living wooden puppet will threaten the community. The podesta demanded Pinocchio attend school after noticing his lack of discipline. The next day, Geppetto brought Pinocchio to the city where he will continue his work on the church's crucifix while Pinocchio attends school. When a circus monkey Spazzatura is in town putting up posters, he comes across Pinocchio and reports back to his handler, Count Volpe, a travel circus showman, hoping it would bring him fame and fortune. He finds Pinocchio in town and convinces him to join the circus. Sebastian tried to persuade him otherwise and obey Geppetto's orders, but he got smashed by Spazzatura. He was later tricked into signing a contract with the Volpe, requiring him to pay compensation if he returns from the circus. The podesta later visits Geppetto at the church, who informs him that Pinocchio did not show up at school, much to his shock as he sent him away earlier to it. Sebastian points Geppetto in the direction of the circus just outside of town. After a bedazzling performance by Pinocchio, Geppetto takes him back and scolds him for not following instructions. Volpe tried to take Pinocchio to explain that he signed a contract, but Geppetto wouldn't comply either way. Their little confrontation resulted in Pinocchio being thrown to the road, where he gets run over by a truck. Geppetto holds the lifeless wooden puppet and mourns Pinocchio's death. Pinocchio is sent to the afterlife and wakes up in the underworld. He later meets with Death, who claims to be the sister of the Wood Sprite who gave him life. She explains that although Pinocchio is immortal, he has to spend some time in the underworld. Every time he dies, just until the hourglass empties, and he will return to the mortal world. She explicitly cautions him that every time he dies, the time he will need to spend in the afterlife will continue to increase each time he returns. Pinocchio later wakes up in a clinic, very much alive and kicking, amazed by his immortality. Podesta suggests he be recruited as part of the Royal Italian Army for the military youth camps. Meanwhile, Volpe insists that Pinocchio worked for him given the circumstances of the contract he signed, pulls him away and returns home with Pinocchio to figure things out. Geppetto scolds Pinocchio for the trouble he has caused him, and he now owes Volpe a massive amount of money while Podesta insists on recruiting him into the army. After being explicitly told as a burden by Geppetto, Pinocchio runs away to join the circus under the condition that Volpe pays Geppetto for the work he will do. Sebastian tries to reason with him, but he traps him in a glass, determined to be useful to Geppetto by earning some money for him. As Pinocchio earns his keep by doing performances, Volpe, on the other hand, secretly keeps the money for himself. As they cross the ocean to a small town by the sea called Catania, Spazzatura uses this opportunity to tell Pinocchio of Volpe's deceit. He He claims that the Count has not sent a penny to his father, but Pinocchio insists that Spazzatura is jealous as he is a bigger star than he is. Hearing Spazzatura going behind his back, Volpe savagely beats him up. But Pinocchio steps in and tries to defend the monkey. Unfortunately for him, Volpe retaliates and threatens to burn his wooden body if he doesn't follow orders. Meanwhile, Geppetto finds out about Pinocchio running away and decides to chase after his boy after a moving speech by Sebastian about a poor boy's love for his creator and father. Despite his efforts, Geppetto can't seem to reach Pinocchio, who is always a step ahead of him. When he hears that the circus is moving across oceans, he reaches out to a local sailor hoping to take him to where Pinocchio is. The sailor explains that sailing through it is going to be difficult given that there are rumors of the mythical dogfish, a monster fish said to be the size of 20 ships. Geppetto explains that he is determined to find Pinocchio and give whatever it takes to see him. They later come across a minefield filled with every naval mine the military has. As they carefully sail through its waters, they come across the said dogfish, which swallows the ship whole along with Geppetto and Sebastian inside. While fishing for food inside the monster's belly, Geppetto is hopeful that Pinocchio will find his way to him, to which Sebastian remains unconvinced otherwise. The fateful day has arrived when Pinocchio is set to perform for Benito Mussolini, the all-important Il Dolce. Volpe welcomes Mussolini to his humble circus and claims that he has written this performance in honor of his name. Meanwhile, Pinocchio convinces Spazzatura of his plan by singing an embarrassing parody of the patriotic song as revenge for Volpe's rather harsh treatment of them. Outraged by the performance, Mussolini ordered Pinocchio to be executed and the circus burned down. Pinocchio is back in the afterlife, explaining to Death how he has escaped war, bullets, fire, and being run over. Death explains that his immortality is a burden that may be too big to carry for a boy like him, as he will inevitably have to live to see his family and friends age and die. He tries to ask her a question, but time is up and he wakes up at the back of the truck where Podesta has taken him to a boot camp, where small boys are trained to fight in the war. Podesta explains that Pinocchio is the perfect soldier. Given his miraculous immortality, he can survive any attack. He convinces Pinocchio to enlist, claiming that his father would be proud if he returned home as a hero. When inside the barracks, Candlewick, Podesta's son, explains that this is the elite military project for the special patriotic youth. Pinocchio later befriends Candlewick, who shares his fear of disappointing his father, so he continues to follow his orders, even if he feels they are unreasonable for their exercise. Podesta has split them into two teams, one led by Candlewick and the other by Pinocchio. A tower will be in the middle of the battlefield, and the first team to place their flag at the top wins. Armed with paint rifles and confetti bombs, they commence mock war exercises. Pinocchio and Candlewick reach the top simultaneously, where they struggle with each other on who gets to put their flag first. They later laugh and agree to end the exercise as a tie when they raise their flags together. Furious with the result, Podesta orders Candlewick to shoot Pinocchio with a real gun. When Candlewick refuses, Podesta takes it upon himself to do the dirty deed when he suddenly gets killed in a bombing by an Allied aircraft. Pinocchio is thrown into the air into a nearby cliff while Candlewick and the other boys flee. Still groggy from the explosion, Pinocchio gets caught by Volpe, who blames him for everything that happened. He plans on burning Pinocchio at the stake as revenge for ruining his circus. Pinocchio begs Spazzatura to help him, who decides to help Pinocchio after being fed up with Volpe's abuse. Volpe threatens to attack him, so Spazzatura pounces on him, and they both fall to where Volpe dies from the fall while Spazzatura falls into the water. The cliff breaks apart from the bombings in a distant explosion and Pinocchio falls into the water too. While drifting on the ocean with the wooden log, Pinocchio and Spazzatura feel hopeful when they spot a nearby island in the distance. Their hopeful cries quickly turn to fear when they realize it isn't an island but a monster fish that swallows them up. While trying to gather himself from a rather riveting experience, Pinocchio later recognizes the singing to be of his father. Finally, the long search is over and Pinocchio is reunited with Geppetto and Sebastian, who warmly embraces his son. Pinocchio claims they will return home after Geppetto recovers, but Geppetto insists that there is no escaping the dreaded beast. Sebastian notices the monster's blowhole and believes they could use it to escape. He suggests Pinocchio tell a lie to grow his nose into a full-sized pine tree, which they can use to cross over to the monster's blowhole. They eventually manage to escape, but the beast is dead set on eating them again. Pinocchio gets swallowed up along with a naval mine where he sacrifices his life to detonate it and kills the beast and himself. Pinocchio finds himself in the afterlife, begging Death to send him back immediately so he can save Geppetto from drowning. Death insists that there are rules to be followed and warns him of the consequences, but Pinocchio demands he be returned to the mortal world. Death explains that by breaking the hourglass, he too will be breaking his immortality, and he will return as a mortal with only one life to live. Pinocchio enthusiastically breaks the hourglass and finds himself in the water, where he manages to save Geppetto at the cost of his own life and dies from drowning. Geppetto wakes up alive but discovers Pinocchio is genuinely dead. The Wood Sprite appears before them and Geppetto begs her to bring him back to life. She explains that Pinocchio had become a real boy to save his father and points out that real boys don't come back. Sebastian speaks up and demands she grants him the wish she promised him, albeit admitting that he may not have truly fulfilled what was asked of him. The Wood Sprite is impressed, seeing Sebastian's love for Pinocchio. Regardless, the Wood Sprite honors her promise given his goodwill and brings Pinocchio back to life. After a tearful reunion, Pinocchio and the others return home to spend whatever is left of their lives as a family. Just like Death warned him, Pinocchio outlives all his loved ones, so he travels to parts unknown for new adventures. The end. Thank you for watching. Check out these other videos and make sure to subscribe and tap the bell to be notified.